Right, so take two. Kasra Ghanbari, thank you for participating in this show that no one's seen yet at the time we're airing it. So
Perfect. That's exactly the show I like.
That's why I called you.
Emergency.
So if no one has any idea who you are, I know you're very involved in comic art fans right now. So why don't we start with that and just give a little bit of a background on that, and for the purpose of kind of explain it to people who have no idea what it is.
I'm going to stick with my standard answer, which is go to comicartfans.com if you want to know about it. It's a seizure-inducing experience. It can be a little bit hard to describe, but in a nutshell, we're the global hub for everything related to original comic art. So particularly if you're a collector, we can set up galleries there and display your collection, break it down the way that you like. But of course, you can also sell and you can trade. But if you're an auction house, Heritage, Comic Connect, Comic Link, Hakes, all the big ones related to consistently selling original comic book art, you're on there. All the art reps are on there. All the dealers are on there. And it's been built out over a little over 20 years. And the last 2 years, we've we'll call it phase 3 of CAF has been initiated, and we're building it out pretty quickly. So worth going to, worth checking out, and, original comic art and illustration art and comic strip art. And currently about 2 million pieces have been posted. I think 1.3 million of them are publicly posted.
Yeah, so I guess a big part of it is just being the first to put something out there that gets that sort of synergy of just that's what everyone uses. Like there isn't really a second.
Yeah, there's
option.
A little bit of that. There's a little bit of at some point there was a too big to fail kind of dynamic as well.
Yeah.
There was also no one else has ever done it. This is what I like. This is what I want to see in the world, which is really the core credit that the 3 founders should get, which is, Bill and Maureen Cox and Chris Haggard. The 3 of them did it entirely. And so it's also one of those things where, you look back afterwards and you're like, why didn't anyone else do it? Why didn't anyone else think about it? Well, they may have, but they didn't do it. And they may not have thought about it. They may have thought about it in a very different way. I can tell you that Bill, Maureen, and Chris thought about it in a very generous way, which should really be commended, which is the art form is important. Collecting comic book art is awesome. And there is a fragmented community out there. Community matters. It's not just some woke word. It actually means something in practice. Just the word falls short of what it actually is. And their intention was reflected in the design of the site and its capabilities and its ambitions. And they did wonderfully in being a cornerstone of creating a genuine global community. I mean, I'll tell you one thing. Might ramble on a little bit about this. And if I'm sounding a little bit poetical or something, just slap me or something, right? But it's very hard to make friends when you get older. It's just, that's the way it is. Every year you get older, you kind of expect to continue to meet people, interesting people, make friends, but more importantly, have 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 or whatever meaningful relationships. As you get older, you'd like to have that happen, but it's difficult. And I have never been part of any group of people where I more readily make meaningful friendships. Now, they're not the kind necessarily like junior high school, broke the first 14 laws you ever broke and did all of the wrong things. And those sorts of friends that are like, the family you chose level friends. But I can walk into a room genuinely with 200 of these fellow narrative and comic book art collectors, and I have a connection to them that I couldn't find in the world otherwise over the course of years. And that ends up being the little bit of sprinkled magic on all of this, that when we choose, to collect, guitars or a particular collectible, it's not just the shared obsession. There's some very weird shared psyche part of ourselves, and we end up becoming magnets and kind of finding one another. And probably like any friendship or marriage, it's the person that you'll like or love the most and the person that you'll hate the most. The frenemy thing, my biggest competitor, whatever it is. That's ended up being, I think, the biggest accomplishment and legacy of comic art fans. Now, I hope to add to it in very real ways, but so far that's where we're at.
Yeah. I mean, looking at other collectible markets, you look at auction houses, a lot of auction houses, like, they're just selling the stuff. They're not, there's not really passion behind it. Whereas I think the comic market's different because they're outside of Heritage. It seems like everyone else involved, not saying that Heritage isn't, but it seems like the smaller dealers, the smaller auction houses, like, they're very passionate about this stuff just as much as like they're collectors first, it seems like, unless you see it differently.
Oh, no. But I mean, they very much were collectors first, and they found themselves, becoming a dealer just by the passage of time, the amount of inventory they had, their networking and collections, personal disposition, whatever it may be. And there's 20 years of people becoming art reps because they went to conventions and, drank a lot at bars and laughed a lot and did it with the same 2 or 3 or 4 artists. And they just woke up one day and they're like, I'm an art rep. There is a lot of maturation going on in the original comic art field as well. Some of it welcomed, some of it inevitable, some of it a little bit sad. I'm not going to say that we're coming out of an innocence period. That would be like it would be too simple a way to describe it. But it's kind of growing up. It's kind of growing up now. And we have that looming sort of mothership from outer space in LA with the Lucas Museum, really defining what narrative art is and visual storytelling art, and having original comic art as at the forefront of that. So, illustration and comic art are really the two primary faces of that. Film and movie prop work as well. And with all due respect to your audience, they have that in the bag. I think that they're really going forward with illustration and comic book related art as the areas that are the bigger sell for them, if you will, the bigger sort of infusion of what they believe the importance of narrative and visual storytelling art are. So comic book art, as narrowly defined, even that term is loaded, but original comic book art is really coming of age. I see within 2 or 3 years it being far more prominent than it is now. And, art shows, gallery shows, and acquisitions or presentations inside of cultural institutions becoming more and more common. And you're going to see that even to the lead up of the public opening of the Lucas Museum.
So what's the driver of that? Like, what was the tipping point? Because it definitely didn't used to be that way.
Yeah, there's sort of the I'll call it like left and right brain answer to that, and it's probably deserving of both. So there's the art form itself, which is extraordinary. It really need to start like it's almost like a history of human beings. Where do you start? You know, like let's start with prehistoric times, sort of thing. The art form itself is really it's really something special. Sequential panels, images, words married. Think about how simple that is.
Yeah, I mean, Scott McCloud kind of touched on that in his Understanding Comics. Like that was quite a while ago, but I remember reading that, and
it's
he
still
sort of went all the way back and kind of looked at it through a different lens than most people do.
It's eye-opening. It really is. It's just as relevant today. Understanding Comics, Scott McCloud, go get it. You'll get a cheap used copy if you want on Amazon. It's a quick read. If it doesn't catch you within 20 pages, throw it away or give it to a kid and let him have a good life. Because it's very enriching, this art form. Yeah. The diversity of stories is limitless. It's boundless. It's, to me, because I'm a subversive little shit inside, it is a revolutionary art form. It is not beholden to anything, one person, nothing. It's you, a pen or a pencil, and a piece of paper. That's about as revolutionary as it gets. And you can quite literally, any style, any pacing, any story, any idea, it's as elastic as it gets. And that's why when I say like the comic book industry or original comic art, I kind of cringe inside. It's more than a shorthand. It's like doing, there's a lack of justice there because it encompasses American superhero art and independent and underground comics and European comics like bande dessinée and fumetti and manga, and it is extraordinarily diverse. So there's that. And there are people that have loved it throughout and obsessively loved it and studied it. And the lack of any coherence with the community was a factor. I would say I think comic art fans has a seat at the table of galvanizing the collecting and eventually the value of original comic art due to the reliability and the dynamics just of, you know, buyer seller of comparable values on pieces. The auction house is getting involved, the dealer's getting involved, the explosion of pop culture, the growth of conventions, you know, the rise of the artist, even in the comic book industry. You know, it's sort of toggled back and forth between writers and artists, and the artists are king, and the writers, the exceptional ones, are king. A lot of factors, but very, you know, public sales and auction house sales and the passage of time and the availability and the ability to describe and to a degree dictate cultural and historical relevance within the art itself so that it's not sort of hyper gate kept by I don't know, experts, intellectuals, assessors, you know, all of the people that play. Sounds a little Wild West, and it was a little Wild West for a while. It's beyond Wild West now. And it survived the amoeba to multi-cell sort of stage, and it's gone through some weird differentiation, and there have been some cancer cells that have appeared, and they've been summarily radiated, and here we are. We're you know, we're upright and thriving. And I'll end it with another. I'll start it with the art form. I'll do a little middle chaos BS that I did to sound like I know what I'm talking about, and I'll end it and ruin it by saying that it was timing and luck. There was always some sort of bridge going on at any point in time in the last 30 years with original comic art. And I could retroactively put a narrative on it and write a book on it, and make it sound pretty strange and dramatic, but all the way up to even, the timing of the Lucas Museum being formed and the age of the collectors and what came in what time increments afterwards, the end of the Bronze Age and, the rise of people like Alan Moore and, Frank Miller and others, and then the image industry and Hellboy and the MCU and DCU. And when you look at the timing, it's almost like, it's almost strange. I'll leave it at that. That's the long answer.
So I was heavy into reading comics, which grew into like collecting comics, and was even like a comic dealer, like in high school and stuff. So my kind of prime era where I was super laser focused on everything comic books was basically 1977.
Yeah.
Star Wars. That's what got me to comic books.
That's a particular year, 1977.
All the way up through, I would say 91, 92.
Oh, you survived in 91. Good.
Yeah. And then everything just became like poly-bagged, multiple cover, like, I don't know.
Yeah, and girls and drugs too. In 91 with that age, there are other things to pay attention to.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause that's basically when I graduated high school, is 91.
So. We're overlapped.
Yeah.
Almost.
But then I just sort of like went to college, disengaged, got interested in film and television more and other things. But like between, let's say 91 and now, like, I mean, I would say 1990-ish, 91, like when Jim Lee and Image, like that must have been when the most comics were being printed.
Yeah.
And now the internet happened, and I don't know do you have any idea of how much people consume like digitally versus actually buying a paper comic book these days? Or
no, it's all over the place. And a lot of the digital platforms had trouble seeding and then ran out of money or were acquired and then summarily dropped.
Because that was Amazon, right? Because I had subscribed to whatever it was called, Comixology.
Yeah.
And then I tried logging into it recently, and
I think generally it's a lot more accepted now. And then certainly, I'm old enough to say the younger generations, it's far more normalized. I just don't know how the sales are. I'm not up to date on sales because I look at sales different than consumption, and digital environments. It's quite different. Not just pirating, but I don't know if they can reliably sell digital comics and have it be, an important contributor to the financial well-being of a book or a company. But I believe sales are up, and there's been a little bit more consolidation and clarity on digital platforms. But people are still dealing with old-timer worries and problems like political news coverage, where immigrants are eating dogs and all immigrants should basically be exported and float in the ocean, and if they die, so be it, kind of stuff. It's like I can't transport my digital library from this platform to this platform, and this platform went dead. Therefore, I've been basically ripped off. Where's the class action suit? I want to join it. It's like that level of a feeling of that is precarious, that it's not reliable. It's still going through that phase.
Yeah. So if you go to a big convention like San Diego Comic-Con, you see endless tables of people publishing their own comic books. Like, is it kind of just a hobby? Because, if you're not Marvel or DC, like how feasible is it to put something out there that gets enough people buying it to make it like a profitable business venture?
Well, profitable business venture is probably, the part of that question that basically said, that makes my answer super short, which it ain't.
Yeah.
It ain't. That's, it ain't is probably a good slogan for the comic book industry. It covers a lot, but the drive for people to tell stories through this medium is almost primal. It's kind of insane. And so when you walk into San Diego Con and you contrast that to walking into any indie con, like in Toronto or in New York, the big one, Small Press Expo, it's a absolute shock, and you can't help but be, I don't know, overwhelmed with respect for the people and the books that they make. And how viable it is, it's not really all that viable. One thing leads to another thing, leads to another thing, maybe the sale of some of their original art, maybe taking on commissions, getting noticed enough to be do a backup story in a book. But the larger companies have a fairly, I'll just say generally, relatively speaking, a fairly narrow style demand. Some of that is cyclical. Sometimes it is quite literally like a Marvel method. And I mean, back in the day, it was pretty narrow. It's much more diverse now. And yet the demands, the expectations, the techniques employed, the degree of rendering, the detail, what have you, there's a dictate. There's from editorial down. And people that make independent comics normally are about as far afield from that as it gets. It's more about storytelling and communication. And sometimes, though, you get that magic combination of emotional intelligence, having a story to tell, and a style that just is somehow right, either for the story or just what it's interacting with, how it's interacting with the viewer. It's very unpredictable stuff. It's got to be a lot like music. How many notes are there? The genres of music have been pretty fixed for a while, I mean, rock and roll died. When did Lenny Kravitz say rock and roll died? Anyway, you see how much music is uploaded every day. You look at the numbers. It's overwhelming. It almost gives you a little feeling of despair when you see that 1 million tracks are uploaded every day. It's almost like, why am I? But people go out and they identify bands and they identify images. We all know that, okay? But they identify sparks, and you see that a lot in the indie books. I've always been enamored with them. So the answer is it's hardly viable. It's passion projects. It's done in spare time. It's creatively enabling to the people that do it, because it sure beats making a film, or yelling into the YouTube chasm and never even hearing an echo back.
Right.
It's a very tangible thing that you can pick up paper and pencil, lay out a story, have total dominion over the acting and the editing and the color, and it's actually quite wonderful.
Yeah. Well, that's like I was working with, storyboard artists bringing storyboards to auction, and I had coffee with one of these guys, and he's basically a comic book artist that does storyboards. So every time he does storyboards for a film, that gives him money to do a comic book that he wants to do, basically.
Jeff Isherwood in Montreal is very much like that. He's a guy who did a lot of work in the 80s and 90s at Marvel. He's doing Conan again right now. He's wonderful, but he's just damn good at what he does. So they're not going out for the fancy names necessarily for the storyboards. They're going out to the workhorses who know what the hell they're talking about.
Yeah, how to tell a story.
Yeah.
Visually.
And Jeff Isherwood's a comic book guy because he
So
knows he's gonna get a place to work from. He'll
yeah,
make it Darren Aronofsky, but the brutal work has been done by someone who's been through the trenches.
yeah. So do you see younger people getting into comic books and comic book art?
Yes. Yeah. Two different questions. So first, I finally get to have the confrontational question, particularly to Americans, which is, what is a comic book? So yes, they're reading manga, like in numbers that are astounding. Look at Scholastic's numbers. And young readers were gifted with a lot of really interesting creators over the last 10 years and publishers that were willing to back their stories in comic book form. So you have 10 solid years of even young readers so used to the format that it's like, okay, you can call it a comic book if you want, but in a way, comic book almost gets blurred with format. A floppy 28, 32 page thing. And that's irrelevant. It's actually become almost irrelevant to the younger generation. So they're dealing with smaller digest sort of manga format stuff, even with American publishers now, and have had, initially wild success with it just from the format. But it's about sequential or panel-based storytelling that's important. So yes, superhero genre is still alive and well. Rumors of their death have been exaggerated for at least 20 years. Are they the numbers of the past? No. But there are a lot of creative industries that would be envious of the numbers that they get. So the doom and gloom of the comic book industry is endless. There are some very capable screaming heads from comic book shops and publishers and artists. Everyone has been screaming the death of comic books in America, at least for a very long time. And yet it stands. And the number of new publishers announced just in San Diego this year made me laugh. You're talking like some giant industry stalwarts like Joe Quesada and others launching completely new publishing initiatives. And it must be because everything's dying, right? But comic art, of course, which is my interest is the reality, the opportunity there. Excuse me, is I think that there's at least 10,000 to 1 ratio of comic book readers to comic art collectors and a comic art collector at any level. I'm not talking about rabid or professional, even passive. There's a very exciting, as far as I'm concerned, opportunity there to get comic book readers that are exposed to content, know the history, are engaged with the material, to just understand that comic art exists. Very much in the same way that it took a friend to get me to know that blues music existed. And they started me with Robert Johnson because it's about as cliche as it gets. But when I get to Blind Willie McTell, Blind Willie Johnson, when I get to Son House and Mississippi Fred McDowell and all my heroes, like, away we go. My life has been enriched from that moment on. Then there was the friend that played Dvorak Symphony Number 9 for me, and then I found Opus 33 on my own, the piano concerto, and it's one of the most beautiful pieces of music I've ever heard. I have like 14 versions of it, but without that little pin in the whole thing, which feels like more and more of a tension Western culture dynamic where we're just inundated with things. We just need a little bit of an introduction and understanding that something exists, and then we're sort of a little bit of a guiding hand or a trustworthy hand here and there, and away we go. And I believe that the comic book readers, if they knew that comic art existed, if they knew that they could get fun little sketch cards from artists for virtually
Said
free or
Hembeck.
that was Fred Hembeck.
Yeah, I've actually I bought one of those from him on eBay. It was Dr. Manhattan from Watchmen. It cracked me up because there was a Band-Aid over his penis, and I just thought that was hilarious.
Fred's a God-fearing man. He fears the eBay censors. I think I saw that one. Did you actually buy that one?
Yeah, I've got that.
That's a good buy. That is a good buy. The whole point is it doesn't have to be $500,000, John Buscema Wolverine covers. I mean, you wouldn't believe the stuff I have in here. I have some pretty significant pieces, and I have some of the goofiest, dumbest stuff that's up on my wall that makes me laugh, that I prefer over family pictures for sure, right? But it's the joy of collecting original art to begin with. There's that.
Yeah.
And then as applied to comic art, as applied to sentimentality of it, and the actual power and value of the art form and its uniqueness, all of that kind of feedback loop stuff is part of the mandate of comic art fans moving forward. We're going to bring a lot, I mean, tens of thousands of new people to collecting comic art. And I have an idea about how to do that. And I'm doing it partly because I think it'll be healthy for comic books as well. If you look for the same sort of joy in the past in comic books, you might not find it. And you may find yourself quite bloodied in the face, having hit your head against a rock again and again and again and again and again. But so why not, collect some comic art, see if you react to it, and maybe it'll fill you well a little bit, and you'll go back to comic books with a renewed vigor, and maybe look outside of the same one or two places in the damn world that you looked for the joy in the past.
Well, so some of my happiest moments of my childhood, because young people wouldn't even understand this today, because there wouldn't even be any way to sort of show them, but like the comic book store, every week every Friday, me and my friends would get one of our parents, because it wasn't close. It was, 45-minute drive. It was next to a shopping mall's Comics and Comics. That was like a big chain in Northern California. And like, that was our ritual. We'd go, and it was so exciting to see what came out, what's on the shelves, what's going to happen in the stories, all these new artists that were coming out at the time. When McFarlane was doing Spider-Man, it was like, what's the next cover going to look like? And, it's just sad, because looking back, we grew up with music stores and VHS stores, and part of that's just a change in technology.
Sure.
But with comic books, it's sad that there aren't, that's gone. There aren't comic book stores. They're never coming back. That sort of visceral experience, you're like smelling, the paper of the comic books the moment you walk in the store. And it was just an exciting thing where, back then we didn't have a whole lot to watch on television, and video games were more rudimentary, and, comic books were sort of the thing, the sort of exciting culture thing. And even me as a kid, I had my subscription to Comic Buyer's Guide, and I would read that thing cover to cover, just because it was just a fascinating industry. And it was just very open and transparent, and you felt like you were part of it because you could read that and know what was going on, Yeah,
for a long time, it felt like we didn't even deserve them. There was just so much creativity, commitment, momentum, and new areas to explore. It really did feel like a golden era, coming out of the early to mid 70s with like the new X-Men. It was around 75, I think. That issue, Oversize the Grand, in issue 94 with the first new X-Men, and Byrne and Claremont and Austin on all cylinders, and Miller and Moore, and the demands and the what was possible was just exploded. It was incredible, which led right into Image, which is another little interesting test tube on its own. And there was a very quick generational shift by the mid 90s just with that, and speculation came in I get it. And, we lament about it. And it'll just be a different experience to someone that was born 10 or 15 years later. And it'll be a different experience for someone born 10, 15 years after that. And as basically, you know, upright gorillas that we are, it's like, I don't think that we're used to like the world changing in 15 to 20 year increments. And that's part of, it's an emotion we have to be careful about, because the places that people go with that is either depression and sadness because of the degree and the rate of change, or fear and madness. And again, I don't want to get into politics, other than to say that there's hardly anything more venture capitalist than politics. Their analysis and their ability to capture and capitalize on collective human condition is unmatched. So I end up being very thankful that the comic book art form, for example, is thriving, that illustration art is thriving. These institutions have had a very long time to show us what's culturally relevant or important. And it seems like when it comes to art institutions, they haven't been able to show us very much for a very long time, to the point where modern art is essentially, outright mocked. And we just have a handshake agreement that it's image making, as much as it is content. It's exercising willpower. It's things like that. I like movie props. I like guitar collectors. I have friends in both. I like that we're deciding that these things have a value and a cultural significance, and we're caretakers not only of the objects but of their value. And on the front end, putting a dollar value on them leads to a recognition of their cultural value. It's just the superficiality, if you will.
Yep.
The flow that we work from. I think that we're taking over. Yeah. And it's mostly because our betters, if you will, excuse me for attaching such a nasty word to them, they haven't given us any answers for a very long time. Mm-hmm. So here we come, a little boy out of California tells an ancient hero's journey story and makes a lot of money, and we're still talking about it 40 plus years later, and he's using the money all along to buy all these things that he believed and Spielberg believed and others believed were valuable. They were valuable all along.
Yeah.
Bernie Wrightson Frankenstein plates are almost mythical now. Well, you mean they weren't when they were made? They weren't in the 10 years afterwards? Like, how we ascribe value, cultural and otherwise, has always been really interesting to me. And I would submit to you and your audience, whoever cares, and for whatever reason, that you will hardly find a more untapped market as far as where it is, versus where it should or could be, than original comic art. Good luck.
Well, it's certainly blown up a lot in the last, 30 years in particular.
30 years and between, I would say, 2000 to 2010, and then around 2014, 2017, and definitely the pandemic dynamic, which is, across most collectibles, 2020 to 2022, 23. And then the fluctuation that we've seen over the last 12, 18 months, I think would be the envy in most collectibles.
Yeah.
It's not really been all that bad.
No, I mean, because I started going to San Diego Comic-Con in 87 when I was like 14. And I remembered seeing all this stuff laying out on tables for relatively next to nothing compared to what they sell for.
Well,
now.
you hear stories back in the day where they would take like Gil Kane, who was, maybe on the Mount Rushmore of Marvel comics. Where you look at his body of work, and was a fantastic and prominent cover artist. So he created a lot of iconic images that we grew up on. They would, on a rainy day, they would throw his pages on the ground so people could wipe their feet.
Wow.
It's so interesting to me what we ascribe value to, what we collectively agree has value, and how that grows, how it can get lost and contorted, but still, at some point, the underlying object has its own say on fighting against parts of human nature. But I love watching this stuff, whatever it may be. If it's a Funko Pop, if it's a piece of plastic from a mold made a million times over, and there's a little error in Boba Fett, and
I was just gonna say that's a good example.
I love it. Because I was in the science field. I worked in biotech and the pharmaceutical industry, but I really kind of was educated in religious studies and philosophy. So I have a very weird duality into how I look at these things. And the object, the power of the object, we're like marionettes sometimes with this stuff. Who's zooming who? Take another look and tell me, babe. Like, I don't, this stuff is really odd. And it's, there's a lot of magic related things with it. Any case, that's a totally different conversation and a pretty weird one. But movie prop people are starting to come into comic art a bit, certainly, but comic art collectors now, some of the old guard, the ones that have gone through value escalation, that are sitting pretty in a lot of regards, they're finally realizing that movie props exist. And some prominent collectors have been moving into getting some film props. And it doesn't take very many of them for the flow to really begin again.
Yeah.
It's really...
I know a couple that have amazing comic art collections that are just starting to, but they're smart about it, because a lot of people that get into movie prop collecting, their first thing they buy is usually fake. because there's just a lot of fraud in it. But it seems like the comic art people are very savvy, and they want to like curate a collection and be very thoughtful about it rather than just being impulsive.
Well, that's nice of you to say. I don't know if that's true.
I'm only talking about a few people.
Oh yeah, the few people, no doubt. Yeah, no doubt. Another reason why I dropped my prior life, essentially, or in large part transitioning into this role of the CEO of Comic Art Fans, is I have never met a community that to a person were higher capacity than comic art collectors. I've worked with galleries. I've curated shows at galleries in the States and in Europe. I've been in publishing. I've done art rep work for 20 years for fine artists, illustrators, comic artists, sculptors, people you would know. And in the original comic art community, the active people, and I'm talking about in the hundreds of people that I know, not the 10 or the 20 or 15 or 18 over 20 years. I'm talking hundreds and hundreds of people. The most high capacity, interesting, diverse group of human beings I've ever met. So biotech, pharmaceuticals, music, publishing, art rep, art gallery, fine art, blah, 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 just my normal walks of life. None of them as interesting as this community of people.
Yeah.
It's very fulfilling.
Can you talk a little bit about the in-person events that you've put together and that you're planning for the future?
Thank you. Yeah. We comic art fans, we wanted to go a little bit brick and mortar. And so we decided to make a show focused exclusively on art. So it wasn't going to be like the comic book conventions that you hear about. It was going to essentially be an art fair and an art fair trade show hybrid. And it was called the Original Art Expo, OAX. And we had our inaugural one in January 2024. And it's an annual show. And the next one will be January 24 to 26, 2025. And we had 60 artists and 35 or so exhibitors in the first show. Art dealers, art reps, artists we flew in from around the world. A lot of Italians. I don't know how that worked out, but the Italians won the day. And we had special galleries for sort of like a little bit more like a gallery or a museum presentation of artworks not for sale from prominent American illustration collection, the Korshak collection, from a New York auction house / comic book dealer that's well known, Comic Connect. Vincent Zerzulo, Comic Connect had an extraordinary collection of about 12, 15 pieces, like Jack Kirby Thor covers and Bernie Wrightson first Swamp Thing appearance, House of Secrets, like just astounding pieces. And then good friends of mine, Jose Caballeros and Steve Walborough, the Marvel Card Archive and Lakeview Collection, respectively, did a 30-year retrospective on Marvel Masterpieces artworks. It's just incredible. And Adam Kubert, the wonderful Adam Kubert, who we're lucky enough to have right here in Orlando. So I get to go to his home and pet his dogs and talk to his lovely daughter and wife. And Adam had a double gallery of his works, including, like 20 by 30 inch pen and ink covers. I mean, just very ambitious pieces. And a collector of his, who goes by the moniker Wolvie Fan, brought the complete Wolverine issue. Rob, I hope I don't get this wrong. Issue 90. It had 4-page gatefold spreads that were like unprecedented at Marvel. And it's an issue that people remember from its time. Yeah. He had the complete issue, including the cover there. So you got to stand in front of a 30-foot long wall with the cover and the pencil, version and the ink version and these 4-page gigantic, obscenely dense, iconic, image delivering pages. And you got to, essentially experience a comic book, if you will, in a totally different way. So we're continuing the same thing year 2. We'll have the entire convention center in the DoubleTree, the Hilton in Orlando, across from Universal. And we're expanding it to 75 artists. We've added probably 30 additional exhibitor booths. We've got more international attendees and artists. And we're building it around the Lucas Museum narrative art mission.
Nice.
We're folding in illustration art. We're folding in three-dimensional works, the art of cards, if you will, Magic the Gathering, Marvel, DC, and others. Anything narrative-based is going to be under the OAX and umbrella. And we'll have announcements. I don't know when this will come out, but we're having a lot of announcements in October for OAX. Cool.
Awesome. So before we go, what advice would you give to someone who is interested in getting into the world of collecting original comic book art?
Join the community. So you can go to Comic Art Fans and you can get orientated pretty quickly to the players, if you will, the prominent collectors, auction houses, art reps, and art dealers. Then that'll take you to our YouTube channel, Comic Art Live YouTube channel, where we have thousands of videos, thousands. And depending on how much time you want to spend, you could get down to the atomic level understanding just by spending some time on that YouTube channel. But probably the quickest way would be to find a friend or two in the community, of which you can find many. And if you have a council of three, just three, I'll call them a council of three, you will find generous, energetic, knowledgeable, people that will orientate you and help you and have you avoid some front end mistakes and start wherever it is in the process that you start. If you're starting with auction houses and, investment grade $20,000 up pieces, whatever it may be, or if I want to build out a portfolio, if it's related to your past experiences with comics that you want to convert to comic art and dip a toe in, whatever level you're coming in at, it's very, very, it's so accessible. It's one of the other things about this is it's the artists to the collectors are just amazingly accessible. Or just send me an email and I'll help you out. It's no problem at all. I know so many good people all over the world.
Yeah.
Happy to meet new people and help. It's very much like that. And I think it'll be that way for still a long time. That's the good news. One day it won't. That's okay.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming on the show. And
I hope I hope it didn't bore the tear out of.
No, I love talking to you.
Not you. We're friends. Worried about these movie people, whoever's watching this.
Oh, no.
Our moms, whatever. Like, sorry, Mom, if I was boring. There you go. Thank you for asking me on. Thank you for letting me talk about original comic and narrative art. It's going to appear everywhere. So the more we can talk about it now, the better. And a lot of the movie stuff is sort of adjacent to this anyway.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you.
Thanks.